Jasmine Bailey stands frozen in the first-class cabin, her designer uniform in tattered champagne dripping from her braids. Wealthy passenger Eleanor Whitfield smugly smirks, not realizing she's just assaulted the daughter of airline CEO Darius Bailey, who watches from the jetway. Security arrives as the power dynamic suddenly shifts. Before we dive deeper into this shocking encounter, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and buckle up for a story of entitlement, prejudice, and an unexpected twist that changed the entire airline industry. The skies might be friendly, but not everyone on board shares that sentiment. Jasmine Bailey was not your typical flight attendant. At 27, she held an MBA from Yale, spoke 4 languages fluently, and had already closed deals worth millions for her father's company. Yet today, like every day for the past 6 months, she donned the navy blue uniform of Skyline Airways and prepared to serve passengers in first class. It had been her idea, this undercover program. You can't run what you don't understand. She had told her father, Darius Bailey, the 58-year-old founder and CEO of Skyline Airways. I need to experience every position in this company if I'm going to lead it someday. Darius, a self-made billionaire who had built Skyline from a single leased plane to a fleet of 300 aircraft, couldn't argue with that logic. He had started as a baggage handler himself, working his way up through the ranks, facing discrimination at every turn. In the 80s, black-owned airlines were virtually unheard of, and many investors had slammed doors in his face. But Darius had persevered, leveraging his engineering degree and unwavering determination to revolutionize the regional market before expanding internationally. Now, Skyline Airways was the 3rd largest carrier in the country, known for its impeccable service and innovative approach. And Jasmine was the heir apparent, though few outside the executive suite knew it. Knowledge is power, and invisibility is knowledge, Darius often said. It was their family motto of sorts. The Bailey Method Stay Calm document. Everything then strikes strategically when opponents least expect it. Jasmine had experienced racism throughout her life, from the exclusive private schools, where teachers were surprised by her articulate answers, to the Ivy League university, where classmates assumed she was there to fill a quota to the fraud. Boardrooms where older executives still sometimes mistook her for an assistant. Each time she followed the Bailey method, filing away the offenses and using them to fuel her drive to succeed. Her current assignment as a flight attendant on premium international routes was teaching her more than she'd expected about customer service. The way first-class passengers spoke to the crew often revealed their true character more than any business meeting could. Jasmine took mental notes on which executives treated service workers with respect. Those were the people Skyline should do business with. "Girl, you ready for the JFK route today?" Zoe Washington asked, interrupting Jasmine's thoughts as they prepared for the pre-flight briefing. "I hear that Whitfield woman is on the manifest again." Zoe was Jasmine's closest friend at the airline and one of the few people who knew her true identity. They'd bonded instantly 6 months ago, Zoe appreciating Jasmine's lack of pretension despite her background and Jasmine valuing Zoe's candor and expertise. "Mrs. always needs extra pillows." And Champagne Jasmine groaned, "Lucky us." "Just remember 3 more weeks and your undercover stint is over," Zoe said, straightening her own uniform. "Then you'll be announced as executive vice president, and we'll all pretend we didn't see you struggle with the beverage cart that first week." Jasmine laughed, adjusting her custom-tailored uniform, regulation in appearance, but crafted from fabric that cost more than most flight attendants' monthly salary. It was her one indulgence. She couldn't bear scratchy polyester against her skin. "Let's just get through this flight first," Jasmine said, not knowing how prophetic those words would prove to be. The sunrise painted Atlanta's skyline in hues of amber and gold as Jasmine awoke in her Buckhead penthouse. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city where her father had first launched Skyline Airways 25 years ago. The contrast between her actual life and her flight attendant persona never failed to amuse her. At home, surrounded by modern luxury custom artwork and the trappings of wealth. At work, compressing her personality into the cheerful, servile role passengers expected. Her phone buzzed with her father's morning call. "You ready for the New York route today?" Darius Bailey's deep voice carried the slight Louisiana accent he never fully shed despite decades in Atlanta's business circles. "As I'll ever be," Jasmine replied, activating the speakerphone while selecting a simple outfit to wear to the airport. She'd change into her uniform there. "I'll be flying back with the evening return. Then tomorrow we have the executive committee meeting about my transition." "About that," Darius paused. "The board is suggesting we announce your appointment at the quarterly meeting instead. More shareholders present." Jasmine frowned. "That's 3 weeks away." "We agreed the undercover program would end this week." "I know, baby girl. But Richardson and Matthews think the theatrics of revealing you at the larger meeting would boost stock prices. Plus, it gives you more time to compile your report on customer service improvements." She sighed, knowing her father was right about the optics. "Fine. 3 more weeks of serving drinks and reminding entitled passengers that the call button isn't a toy." Darius chuckled. "Building character." "Speaking of entitled passengers, I noticed Eleanor Whitfield is on your manifest today." "Don't remind me," Jasmine groaned, selecting a simple gold necklace that had belonged to her late mother. "That woman has complained about everything from the temperature of her water to the accent of our Brazilian pilot. Well, be extra careful around her. Her husband's company is pursuing that maintenance contract with us. Significant deal." "I know, Dad. I'll be the epitome of professionalism as always." She hesitated before adding, "Any chance you'll be in New York today?" "Actually, yes. Last-minute meeting with some investors. I fly up on the private jet after lunch, but I might stop by operations at JFK to check on that new terminal construction." "Well, if you're around, come say hi to your favorite undercover boss," Jasmine joked. "I'll be the one with the drinks cart and forced smile." After ending the call, Jasmine continued her morning routine, mentally preparing for the day ahead. She drove herself to the airport in her modest Toyota, another aspect of her cover, rather than having her regular driver take the Mercedes. At the staff entrance, she nodded to security personnel who had no idea the young woman in jeans and a light sweater was actually the owner's daughter and future company leader. The anonymity was refreshing in many ways. In the locker room, she changed into her uniform, carefully pinning her name tag, Jasmine B., to her jacket. The subtle modification of her uniform was invisible to most, but the custom silk blend and perfect tailoring made the long flights more bearable. "There she is," Zoe greeted her with a coffee. "Ready for pre-flight Malcolms in rare form today." Malcolm Reynolds, their supervisor, was a 50-something man who'd been passed over for promotion multiple times and took his frustrations out on the staff, particularly the younger women of color. "What's his problem this morning?" Jasmine asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. "New directive from corporate about diversity training. Apparently, we all need to attend workshops next month." Zoe rolled her eyes. "He's acting like it's a personal attack." The pre-flight briefing confirmed Zoe's warning. Malcolm was curt, his instructions tinged with unnecessary sharpness directed primarily at the Black and Latino crew members. "Bailey Washington, you're in first class today," Malcolm announced, not meeting either woman's eyes. "Try not to disturb the premium passengers with excessive chatter this time." Jasmine bit her tongue. She and Zoe were consistently rated highest in passenger satisfaction surveys, a fact Malcolm conveniently ignored. "Yes, sir," they responded in unison, exchanging glances. As the crew dispersed to begin preparations, Jasmine overheard 2 white attendants whispering. "How does she afford those shoes on our salary?" one murmured, eyeing Jasmine's Italian leather pumps. "Another small luxury she couldn't sacrifice. Must have a sugar daddy. Or she's running side hustles on layovers, if you know what I mean," the other responded with a snicker. Jasmine pretended not to hear, filing away the interaction for her report on company culture. 3 more weeks of this, she reminded herself. Just 3 more weeks. Little did she know that today's flight would accelerate her timeline in ways she couldn't imagine. Eleanor Whitfield's morning began, as it always did, with demands. "The orange juice isn't freshly squeezed," she snapped at her housekeeper in her Westchester mansion. "I can taste the difference, Maria. Take it back." At 52, Eleanor had perfected the art of making others feel small. Born into old money, married into more, she wore her privilege like expensive perfume, overwhelming and impossible to ignore. "Yes, Mrs. Whitfield," Maria replied, whisking away the offending beverage. Eleanor turned her attention to her husband Richard, who sat hidden behind the Wall Street Journal at their breakfast table. "We're cutting it close for our flight, Richard. And don't forget, we're meeting with the Skyline people next week about the partnership. Significant opportunity for your company." Richard lowered his paper just enough to reveal tired eyes. At 56, he had built his aerospace parts manufacturing business into a powerhouse, though many attributed his success more to his connections, primarily through Eleanor's family, than to his business acumen. "I'm aware, Eleanor," he replied mildly. "The preliminary contracts are all ready with legal." Eleanor's phone chimed with an incoming call. "Bitsy, yes, we're flying to New York today. First class on Skyline, unfortunately. Richard insists we experience their service before the partnership. I know I prefer private too, but he's being practical." She laughed at something her friend said. "Oh, absolutely. You should have seen the looks when I brought it up at the club meeting. Some people simply don't understand that maintaining certain standards is for everyone's benefit. Integration is fine in theory, but the Palmer Oaks Membership Committee needs to consider cultural fit." Richard visibly winced behind his newspaper. "Precisely. Anyway, we'll discuss more at lunch tomorrow. Cipriani at 1. Eleanor ended the call and turned her attention to her appearance in a nearby mirror, adjusting her perfectly highlighted blonde bob and Mikimoto pearl necklace. "The car's waiting," Mrs. Whitfield, the housekeeper, announced, having returned with properly fresh juice that would go untouched. "Finally. Come along, Richard, and bring those contract papers. I want to review them on the flight." The drive to Atlanta International was filled with Eleanor's one-sided conversation about social obligations and committee meetings. Richard occasionally nodded his mind clearly elsewhere. At the premium check-in counter, Eleanor made her presence felt immediately. "Whitfield, first class to JFK," she announced to the agent, not bothering with pleasantries. "We'll need pre-boarding, and I specifically require aisle 2A for my back condition." "Of course, Mrs. Whitfield," the agent replied smoothly. "Though 2A is a window seat. Did you mean 2C the aisle?" Eleanor's eyes narrowed. "I know what I meant. 2A has more legroom due to the bulkhead configuration." "Actually, ma'am, that would be row 1. Row 2 is standard first-class seating." "Are you suggesting I don't know what I'm talking about?" Eleanor's voice rose slightly, causing nearby passengers to glance over. Richard intervened. 2C will be fine. Thank you," he told the agent. "And 2A for me." Eleanor shot him a look but didn't contradict him. The agent processed their boarding passes with visible relief. In the exclusive first-class lounge, Eleanor continued her imperious behavior, sending back a cappuccino for having excessive foam and complaining about the temperature. When boarding was announced, she strode purposefully to the gate, bypassing the line that had formed and presenting her boarding pass directly to the gate agent. Pre-boarding, she stated rather than requested. It was there that Eleanor first encountered Jasmine, who was checking documents at the gate. "Welcome aboard, Mrs. Whitfield." Jasmine greeted her with a professional smile. "May I see your boarding pass, please?" Eleanor barely glanced at her, thrusting the document forward while continuing her conversation with Richard about someone named Heather who had committed the social faux pas of wearing white after Labor Day. Jasmine scanned the pass and returned it with unfailing politeness. "Enjoy your flight, Mrs. Whitfield." "Mr. Whitfield." Eleanor's eyes finally flickered to Jasmine, taking in her appearance with a dismissive once-over, her gaze lingering judgmentally on Jasmine's braided hairstyle before she swept past without acknowledgement. Inside the aircraft, Jasmine and Zoe were preparing the first-class cabin, arranging welcome champagne and hot towels. Mrs. Whitfield welcomed Zoe greeted as Eleanor located her seat. "May I take your coat?" "I suppose," Eleanor replied, shrugging off her Burberry trench without fully turning around. "And I'll need a sparkling water with lime immediately." "Not lemon, lime." Of course, Zoe responded, maintaining her professional demeanor. Richard, following behind, offered an apologetic smile. "Thank you," he said quietly as he handed over his own coat. When Jasmine approached with the pre-flight beverages, Eleanor was already tapping away impatiently on her phone. "Excuse me, Mrs. Whitfield," Jasmine said. "Would you care for champagne or orange juice before takeoff?" Eleanor looked up, her expression souring as she recognized Jasmine from the gate. "Neither. I already told the other girl I wanted sparkling water with lime." "That's being prepared for you now," Jasmine explained smoothly. "We offer champagne or juice during boarding as a welcome beverage." "Well, I don't want either," Eleanor replied curtly. "And when you address me kindly, make eye contact rather than mumbling. It's basic professionalism." Jasmine, who had been making direct eye contact the entire time, simply nodded. "Of course, Mrs. Whitfield. Your sparkling water will be right with you." As she turned away, she overheard Eleanor mutter to Richard, "The standards have really slipped. In my day, flight attendants were required to be presentable." Richard's murmured response was inaudible, but his uncomfortable expression spoke volumes. Jasmine shared a knowing glance with Zoe as they continued their preparations. This was going to be a long flight. What neither Eleanor nor Richard Whitfield realized was that the mere flight attendant they were dismissing was actually observing and evaluating them, and their potential business relationship with Skyline Airways hung in the Pontas. Balance. The sleek Airbus A350 lifted smoothly into the clear Georgia sky, leaving Atlanta's sprawling landscape behind. In first class, the 12 passengers settled in for the 2-hour journey to New York. For most, it would be an uneventful flight, with premium service and comfort. For Jasmine Bailey, it was about to become the most significant workday of her undercover assignment. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached our cruising altitude of 35,000 feet, the captain's voice announced over the intercom. "Our flight attendants will now begin service." Jasmine and Zoe moved efficiently through their preparation routine, in the galley arranging the gourmet meal components for the first-class cabin. Eleanor Whitfield is already on her second sparkling water and complained that the first one had excessive carbonation. Zoe whispered, "Want to switch sections? I can take her side." Jasmine shook her head. "I've got this. Remember the Bailey method? Document everything." "If you say so," Zoe replied, unconvinced. "Just remember, it's not worth losing your cool over someone like her." With practiced grace, they began the meal service. Jasmine approached the Whitfield's row with the appetizer course. "Mrs. Whitfield, we have smoked salmon with capers, or a seasonal fruit plate to start," she offered. Eleanor looked up from her magazine with a frown. "Is the salmon farm-raised or wild-caught?" "It's sustainably sourced wild Alaskan salmon, ma'am." "That doesn't answer my question," Eleanor said sharply. "Farm-raised or wild-caught?" "Wild-caught, Mrs. Whitfield," Jasmine confirmed patiently. "Fine. I suppose that will do." Eleanor's tone suggested she was granting an enormous favor by accepting the appetizer. "And bring me another sparkling water. The last one was flat." As Jasmine served Richard his requested fruit plate, he offered another of his seemingly apologetic smiles. "Thank you. Everything looks lovely." Jasmine nodded professionally and continued her service. Throughout the appetizer course, she noticed Eleanor watching her interactions with other passengers, her expression growing increasingly sour. When Jasmine laughed politely at an elderly gentleman's joke 3 rows ahead, Eleanor's hand shot up to press the call button. The chime sounded as Jasmine was collecting empty plates. "Yes, Mrs. Whitfield," she responded promptly. "I find it unprofessional that you're socializing while some of us are still waiting for our plates to be cleared," Eleanor stated loudly, despite the fact that Jasmine was actively in the process of clearing dishes and had not yet reached her row. "I apologize for the delay, ma'am. I'm working my way through the cabin now." "See that you do," Eleanor sniffed. "And I still need that sparkling water." Jasmine made a subtle note on her service tablet, standard procedure for tracking passenger requests, but also her way of documenting the interaction. As the main course service began, Eleanor's behavior grew more challenging. Her filet mignon was overcooked, despite being prepared precisely to the medium-rare temperature she'd specified. The seasonal vegetables were too firm, and her third sparkling water still wasn't to her liking. "Perhaps still water would be more to your taste," Mrs. Whitfield Jasmine suggested professionally. "Don't tell me what I would prefer," Eleanor snapped. "Just bring me another sparkling water and make sure it's properly chilled this time." Jasmine complied, maintaining her composure. She'd handled difficult passengers before, but Eleanor seemed determined to find fault with everything. In her mind, Jasmine recalled her father's advice from years ago. Some people need to put others down to feel elevated. Darius had told her after she'd faced discrimination at her elite private school. Their behavior says nothing about your worth and everything about their character. Document it, learn from it, and when the time comes, use that knowledge strategically. The meal service continued with increasing tension. Eleanor accidentally knocked her elbow into Jasmine's arm as she served the neighboring passenger, causing a splash of wine to spot the carpet. "Oh dear, you really should be more careful," Eleanor said with mock concern. "That's quite clumsy." Richard looked increasingly uncomfortable. "Eleanor, please," he murmured. "The flight attendant is just doing her job." "And not particularly well," Eleanor replied loudly enough for nearby passengers to hear. Jasmine felt a familiar heat rising in her cheeks, but kept her expression neutral as she cleaned up the spill. This wasn't the first time she'd encountered such behavior, and she knew it wouldn't be the last. The difference today was that Eleanor Whitfield's husband's company was seeking a multi-million-dollar contract with Skyline Airways, a decision that would eventually cross Jasmine's desk in her executive role. As dessert service began, Eleanor made her most outrageous complaint yet. "This chocolate torte is entirely too spicy," she declared after one bite. Jasmine blinked in genuine confusion. "Spicy, ma'am? It's our classic chocolate torte with vanilla bean cream. There aren't any spices in the recipe. Are you suggesting I can't taste what I'm eating?" Eleanor's voice rose sharply. "It has a distinct pepper flavor. It's completely inedible." Several nearby passengers exchanged glances. The gentleman across the aisle took a deliberate bite of his own dessert, raising his eyebrows at the obvious lack of spice. "I'd be happy to bring you an alternative dessert," Mrs. Whitfield Jasmine offered. "Perhaps the cheese plate or fresh berries. What I want is for you to acknowledge that this dessert is improperly prepared," Eleanor insisted. "Where is your supervisor? I want to speak to someone competent." Zoe, overhearing from the galley, approached. "Is there something I can help with?" "Yes," Eleanor said imperiously. "Your colleague is refusing to acknowledge that this dessert is inedible and inappropriately spiced." Before Zoe could respond, Eleanor suddenly grabbed Jasmine's wrist, noticing the edge of a watch peeking out from beneath her sleeve. "Is that a Cartier?" she demanded, her eyes narrowing suspiciously. "How does someone like you afford a watch like that on a flight attendant's salary?" Jasmine gently but firmly withdrew her arm. "Mrs. Whitfield, I need to continue service for the other passengers. Would you prefer the cheese plate or berries instead of the torte?" What I prefer is an explanation. Eleanor persisted, her voice rising further. That watch costs more than you make in months. Where did you get it? Several passengers were now openly watching the confrontation. Richard Whitfield looked mortified. "Eleanor, stop this immediately," he hissed. "This is completely inappropriate." "No, what's inappropriate is staff wearing stolen or counterfeit luxury items while serving premium customers," Eleanor retorted. "I want to speak to a supervisor right now." Zoe stepped forward. "I'll call the lead flight attendant, ma'am." Minutes later, Malcolm Reynolds appeared, his expression already set in customer appeasement mode. "Mrs. Whitfield, I understand there's an issue with your dessert," he inquired, pointedly ignoring Jasmine. "The issue is with your staff," Eleanor declared. "This woman is wearing what appears to be an extremely expensive watch that she cannot possibly afford legitimately. I suspect either theft or counterfeiting, neither of which reflects well on your airline." Malcolm turned to Jasmine with immediate suspicion, rather than support. "Bailey, what is this about?" Mrs. Whitfield took issue with her dessert, and then grabbed my wrist to examine my watch, Jasmine explained calmly. "I did not grab her," Eleanor interjected. "I was simply trying to verify if Skyline Airways condones staff wearing stolen merchandise." "The watch was a gift, Mr. Reynolds," Jasmine stated, simply knowing she didn't owe anyone this explanation, but providing it professionally nonetheless. "A likely story," Eleanor scoffed. "From what, a special friend who enjoys your company on layovers?" Gasps came from several nearby passengers at the blatant insinuation. Mrs. Whitfield Richard exclaimed, clearly horrified. Malcolm, rather than defending his crew member, adopted a placating tone. "I apologize for any distress, Mrs. Whitfield. Bailey, perhaps you should work in the main cabin for the remainder of the flight." Before Jasmine could respond, Eleanor reached out suddenly, this time grabbing not just Jasmine's wrist, but the sleeve of her uniform. "I want to see if there are any other gifts she's wearing," Eleanor declared, giving the fabric a sharp tug. The sound of tearing fabric filled the sudden silence as Jasmine's carefully tailored uniform jacket ripped at the seam. The service tray Jasmine had been holding with her other hand tipped, sending a champagne glass toppling. The golden liquid splashed across Jasmine's braids and down the front of her now torn uniform. For a moment, no one moved. Jasmine stood perfectly still, champagne dripping from her hair, her composure finally cracking as tears threatened at the corners of her eyes. Eleanor sat with a triumphant smirk, clearly believing she had put an uppity flight attendant in her place. What Eleanor Whitfield couldn't see was that multiple passengers had their phones out recording the incident. What she didn't know was that the flight was already beginning an unscheduled early descent to JFK following the disturbance. And what she had no way of knowing was that waiting at the gate in New York was Darius Bailey, CEO of Skyline Airways, and Jasmine's father, who had received an urgent text from the cockpit about an incident involving his daughter. Have you ever witnessed someone abuse their perceived power only to have the tables completely turned? Comment number 1. If you've ever seen a satisfying moment when an entitled person realized they'd made a terrible mistake. Like this video if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their job. Subscribe to our channel for more stories of justice and remarkable twists of fate. Now, what would you do if you were in Jasmine's position? Would you reveal your true identity immediately, or would you wait and let the situation unfold strategically? Let's see what happened next, as this flight reached its destination, with tensions at an all-time high. The tension in the first-class cabin was palpable. Passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, eyes darting between Jasmine's champagne-soaked uniform and Eleanor's smug expression. The torn sleeve of Jasmine's jacket hung awkwardly, exposing the edge of the custom silk blouse beneath. Mrs. Whitfield Jasmine said, her voice steady, despite the emotion building in her throat. "Physical contact with crew members is against airline policy." Eleanor scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. I barely touched you. And if your uniform tore that easily, it's clearly made of substandard materials." She looked pointedly at Malcolm. "This is what happens when you lower standards for hiring." Malcolm Reynolds stood frozen, his eyes darting between the influential passenger and his subordinate. His career survival instincts were clearly at war with basic human decency, and survival was winning. "Bailey, go get cleaned up," he finally ordered. "Washington can finish the service." Then, turning to Eleanor Mrs. Whitfield, "I sincerely apologize for this unfortunate incident." Jasmine's eyes widened slightly at the complete failure of support, though she shouldn't have been surprised. Throughout her 6 months undercover, Malcolm had consistently demonstrated his willingness to sacrifice staff dignity to appease demanding passengers. Richard Whitfield, looking genuinely distressed, attempted to intervene. "Eleanor, this has gone far enough. You owe this young woman an apology." For what? Eleanor snapped. For questioning how someone in her position affords luxury items. For expecting professional service. Really, Richard, must you always take the help's side? As Jasmine turned to walk to the galley, she heard Eleanor's stage whisper clearly. "First they let them fly in the planes, then they let them work on the planes, and the standards just keep slipping." It was the breaking point. Jasmine turned back slowly, years of practiced restraint, finally giving way to the need for basic dignity. "Mrs. Whitfield," she said, her voice quiet but clear enough for the entire cabin to hear, "the standards you're referring to were never about quality or professionalism. They were about keeping people who look like me from occupying spaces you believe should belong exclusively to people who look like you." A heavy silence fell over the cabin. Malcolm stepped forward hastily. "Bailey, that's enough. Go to the back immediately." Eleanor's face contorted with indignation. "How dare you speak to me that way? I want this woman fired immediately." "Do you have any idea who my husband is? Who I am?" "I know exactly who you are, Mrs. Whitfield," Jasmine replied, tears now visibly brimming in her eyes, despite her best efforts. "And more importantly, I know who I am." With that, she turned and walked with as much dignity as she could muster toward the galley, where Zoe waited with a towel and sympathy in her eyes. "Oh, Zoe whispered. "Are you okay?" Jasmine took a deep breath. "No, but I will be." The captain's voice came over the intercom. "Flight attendants, prepare for landing." Already, Zoe looked confused. "We're still 30 minutes out from JFK. The lead flight attendant appeared in the galley. "We've been given priority landing due to a cabin disturbance," she explained, shooting a concerned glance at Jasmine's torn uniform and wet hair. Malcolm radioed the cockpit. "Of course he did," Jasmine muttered. "Girl, your dad is going to burn this place to the ground when he finds out what happened," Zoe whispered. "He doesn't need to know," Jasmine started to say, then stopped as her phone buzzed with a text message. It was from her father, on ground at JFK. Cockpit radioed about incident. "We'll meet plane at gate." Jasmine closed her eyes briefly. So much for staying undercover for 3 more weeks. As the plane began its descent, Malcolm reappeared in the galley, his expression thunderous. "Bailey, you've really done it this time. Mrs. Whitfield is a platinum member, and her husband's company is negotiating a major contract with Skyline. Consider yourself suspended pending review. I'll need your ID and credentials as soon as we land." Jasmine stared at him in disbelief. "She assaulted me, Malcolm. She tore my uniform and made racist comments. Multiple passengers witnessed it." "That's her word against yours," he replied dismissively. "And frankly, given your history of attitude problems and that watch you certainly can't afford on your salary, I'm inclined to believe her concerns had merit." Zoe stepped forward. "Are you serious right now? There are at least 10 passengers who recorded what happened." Malcolm's face paled slightly at this information, but he doubled down. "It doesn't matter. Bailey broke protocol by arguing with a premium passenger. That's grounds for immediate termination. Actually, Jasmine said quietly, it's not. Page 47 of the Skyline Airways Employee Handbook clearly states that crew members have the right to defend themselves from abusive behavior, including verbal assault based on race, gender, or other protected categories. Malcolm blinked, clearly surprised that a flight attendant would know the handbook that thoroughly. Well, we'll let HR sort it out. For now, you're grounded. The plane touched down at JFK with a slight bump, taxiing quickly to the gate. As the seatbelt sign dinged off, Eleanor Whitfield's voice could be heard demanding to speak to the airport police about theft of luxury goods by airline staff. As the door to the jetway opened, Malcolm stepped forward, ready to escort the Whitfields off first as an appeasement gesture. But the apology he had prepared died on his lips as he recognized the man standing in the jetway entrance, flanked by airline security and operations staff. Darius Bailey, CEO of Skyline Airways, stood with his arms crossed, his imposing 6'3" frame blocking the exit. His expression was calm, but his eyes blazed with a controlled fury that made Malcolm take an involuntary step backward. "Mr. Bailey, sir," Malcolm stammered. "We weren't expecting you. There's been a small situation with one of our flight attendants." Darius didn't acknowledge Malcolm. Instead, his eyes scanned the cabin until they found Jasmine standing in the galley, her torn uniform and champagne-dampened hair, telling him everything he needed to know. "Jasmine," he called, his deep voice carrying easily through the cabin. "Are you all right?" A collective murmur ran through the first-class cabin as passengers processed what was happening. Eleanor Whitfield, who had been gathering her belongings while complaining loudly about standards these days, froze mid-sentence. "I'm fine, Dad," Jasmine replied, stepping out of the galley. Eleanor's jaw dropped as the realization hit her. The mere flight attendant she had assaulted and demeaned was the daughter of Skyline's CEO, and based on the way Darius Bailey was now looking at her, Eleanor Whitfield's reign of entitled behavior was about to meet its prive. Spectacular end. The first-class cabin of Flight 1372 had transformed from a luxury travel space to the stage for an unfolding drama. Darius Bailey remained in the jetway entrance, his commanding presence causing a ripple effect of whispers among the passengers. Behind him, airline security personnel stood at attention awaiting instructions. Eleanor Whitfield's face had drained of color as the implications of her actions began to dawn on her. Richard Whitfield looked like a man watching his business empire crumble before his eyes. "What seems to be the problem here?" Darius asked, his Louisiana accent slightly more pronounced than usual, something Jasmine recognized happened only when he was containing intense emotion. Malcolm Reynolds, desperate to salvage the situation, stepped forward with a placating smile. "Just a minor misunderstanding, Mr. Bailey. Mrs. Whitfield had some concerns about the service, and unfortunately, Flight Attendant Bailey responded inappropriately." Darius raised an eyebrow. "Is that so? And does a minor misunderstanding typically result in a torn uniform and champagne-soaked hair?" "Well, accidents happen during service," Malcolm stammered. "I've already addressed the situation by suspending Bailey pending review, and I've assured Mrs. Whitfield that we take her complaints very seriously." "Suspended my daughter for what exactly?" Darius's voice remained calm, but the temperature in the cabin seemed to drop several degrees. Malcolm's eyes widened as he realized his mistake in revealing he knew of Jasmine's relationship to the CEO. "Sir, I didn't mean. That is, I was just following protocol for passenger complaints." "I'd like to hear from my EVP of Customer Experience directly," Darius stated, effectively silencing Malcolm as he gestured for Jasmine to join him. A collective gasp went through the cabin. Not only was Jasmine Bailey the CEO's daughter, but she was also an executive vice president of the airline. Jasmine stepped forward, her composure fully regained, despite her disheveled appearance. "Mrs. Whitfield took issue with several aspects of the service, culminating in her grabbing my wrist to examine my watch, which she suggested was stolen or counterfeit. When I attempted to continue service, she grabbed my uniform, resulting in the torn jacket. She also made several comments of a racial nature. Eleanor, recovering from her initial shock, attempted to regain control of the narrative. That's a complete mischaracterization. I was simply concerned about the appropriateness of staff wearing luxury items that could be misinterpreted by passengers. And I certainly never made any racial comments. I have many African American friends. Several passengers exchanged glances at this cliched defense. We have videos. A woman 3 rows back volunteered holding up her phone. I recorded most of the interaction after Mrs. Whitfield started making a scene about the dessert. As did I, added the elderly gentleman across from the Whitfields, surprising Eleanor, who had clearly assumed he would be an ally based on his age and appearance. Young lady, no one deserves to be treated the way you were today. I'd be happy to provide my contact information for any investigation. Eleanor's face flushed with anger and embarrassment. This is ridiculous. Richard, say something. Tell them who we are. Richard Whitfield looked torn between loyalty to his wife and the obvious business catastrophe unfolding. Mr. Bailey, while I cannot excuse any inappropriate behavior, I hope we can discuss this privately, as we do have a pending business relationship to consider. Darius's expression remained impassive. Mr. Whitfield, I make it a policy never to do business with individuals who disrespect my employees or my family. He turned to the security personnel. Please escort Mrs. Whitfield to the customer service office. We'll need to take formal statements regarding the physical assault of a crew member. Assault, Eleanor sputtered. That's absurd. I barely touched her. Unwanted physical contact that results in damage to a uniform constitutes assault under both airline policy and New York state law. Darius replied evenly. But don't worry. Unlike my daughter, you'll be treated with all the respect you're legally entitled to. The implication was clear to everyone in the cabin. Eleanor had failed to provide even basic courtesy to Jasmine, but Skyline Airways would not stoop to the same level. As security personnel entered the cabin to escort Eleanor, her face contorted with rage. Do you have any idea who I am? I sit on the boards of 3 Fortune 500 companies. My family has flown exclusively with Skyline for 15 years. You'll regret this, Bailey. Richard, attempting to salvage what dignity remained, placed a hand on his wife's arm. Eleanor, please. Let's handle this properly. Turning to Darius, Mr. Bailey, I apologize for this unfortunate situation. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting to discuss resolution once everyone has calmed down. Darius nodded once. My office will be in touch, Mr. Whitfield. Though I should be clear, any meeting will be about the incident today, not about your company's contract proposal. That matter is now closed. The remaining passengers watched in stunned silence as Eleanor was escorted off the aircraft, still protesting her treatment. Richard followed his shoulders, slumped in defeat. Malcolm Reynolds stood awkwardly to the side, his career aspirations visibly crumbling as he realized he had backed the wrong person in the conflict. Mr. Reynolds Darius addressed him. I believe we'll need to have a conversation about Skyline's protocols for supporting staff in customer conflicts. My office tomorrow morning at 8. Yes, sir, Malcolm, mumbled, his earlier confidence entirely evaporated. Darius turned to the remaining passengers. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of Skyline Airways, I apologize for the disruption to your journey today. Our customer service team will be contacting each of you with a token of our appreciation for your patience. If any of you recorded today's incident, we would be grateful if you would share that documentation with our team as you exit. He then turned to Jasmine, his executive demeanor softening slightly. EVP Bailey, if you're ready, there's an executive team waiting for your operational review. Jasmine nodded the corner of her mouth, lifting in a small smile at her father's seamless transition to formalizing her role. "Of course, Mr. Bailey. I just need to gather my things." As the remaining passengers disembarked, many offered words of support to Jasmine or expressed their outrage at Eleanor's behavior. Several approached Darius directly to commend Jasmine's professionalism throughout the ordeal. Zoe hung back until the cabin was empty before approaching Jasmine. "So, I guess the undercover boss show is over," she asked with a small smile. "Looks that way," Jasmine replied, gathering her personal items. "I'm sorry I couldn't tell you the whole truth from the beginning." "Girl, please. I figured something was up when you knew how to calculate fuel efficiency figures during that turbulence last month." Zoe laughed. "No regular flight attendant talks about cost per available seat mile in their sleep." Jasmine laughed despite the stress of the day. "I'm going to make sure you're on my team when I officially start in the executive suite," she promised. "I need people who tell it like it is." As they exited the aircraft together, Jasmine's thoughts were already racing ahead to how this incident could catalyze the changes she'd been planning to propose for Skyline's corporate culture. Eleanor Whitfield's behavior was extreme, but it was merely the most visible manifestation of the daily microaggressions many crew members faced. What Eleanor could never have anticipated was that her entitled outburst would become the tipping point for a corporate revolution, one that Jasmine Bailey had been meticulously planning for 6 months, and which was now accelerated by a beige IA, torn uniform, and a father's protective instincts. The private conference room in Skyline's JFK Operations Center hummed with activity as security personnel, legal representatives, and executive team members assembled. Through the glass walls, Jasmine could see Eleanor Whitfield gesticulating angrily in an adjacent room, her face flushed with indignation, as she spoke to 2 impassive airline security officers. Richard Whitfield sat beside her, his expression a mixture of embarrassment and calculation as he periodically checked his phone. Jasmine had changed out of her ruined uniform into a spare business suit kept in her father's office for emergencies. As she settled into a chair beside Darius, her mind was already shifting from flight attendant mode to executive mindset, analyzing the situation from multiple angles. "Legal wants to know if you're pressing charges," Darius said quietly, sliding a tablet across the table with the necessary forms pulled up. "It's your call, Jasmine." She considered for a moment. What would happen to any other flight attendant in this situation? They'd be encouraged to press charges to establish precedent and protect other crew members, he replied, without hesitation. But most wouldn't, fearing career repercussions. "Then I'll file," she decided. Not out of vengeance, but because no one should experience what happened today without consequences. Darius nodded, pride evident in his expression. "That's my girl." The door opened as Malcolm Reynolds was escorted in by Darius's executive assistant. The supervisor's earlier confidence had completely evaporated, replaced by a nervous energy as he took in the assembled company executives. Mr. Reynolds, Darius began formally. "I understand you've been supervising the undercover program my daughter has been participating in." "Yes, sir," Malcolm replied, his voice strained. "Though I wasn't aware of Miss Bailey's identity until recently." "Recently," Jasmine interjected. "You addressed me as your daughter to my father before he ever mentioned our relationship. You've known who I was." Malcolm paled. There were rumors, but I wasn't certain until it became convenient to admit it," Darius finished for him. "Mr. Reynolds, you witnessed a passenger physically assault a crew member today, and your response was to suspend the victim rather than support them. Can you explain that decision?" Malcolm's eyes darted around the room, seeking an ally and finding none. "I was trying to de-escalate the situation with a high-value customer." "Mrs. Whitfield's husband's company is bidding on a major contract with Skyline, and you thought my daughter's dignity was an acceptable sacrifice for a business opportunity," Darius stated flatly. "No, I was following protocol for passenger complaints. Jasmine leaned forward. Which protocol? Specifically, Malcolm. Because I've reviewed all our customer service guidelines extensively during my undercover work, and nowhere do they state that crew members should accept physical assault or racial discrimination. Before Malcolm could respond, the door opened again. Zoe Washington entered, accompanied by 3 other flight attendants from the crew. "You asked for witnesses, Mr. Bailey," Zoe said confidently. "We've all provided statements to security, and several passengers shared their video recordings before leaving the terminal." "Thank you, Miss Washington," Darius replied. "Your professionalism today is noted and appreciated." Malcolm's expression soured as he watched the interaction. "With all due respect, sir," Washington was encouraging Bailey's insubordination throughout the flight. Zoe's eyebrows shot up. Insubordination. I encouraged her to maintain her professionalism despite being harassed, which she did admirably until physically assaulted. Malcolm Jasmine said calmly, "During my 6 months working under your supervision, I've documented 47 instances where you held Black and Latino crew members to different standards than their white counterparts, including harsher discipline, less desirable route assignments, and punitive scheduling." The room fell silent as the implications of her statement sank in. "That's absurd," Malcolm sputtered. "I treat everyone equally." "The data suggests otherwise," Jasmine replied, sliding a folder across the table. "This will all be covered in my complete report, but for now, you're suspended pending review. Please surrender your company credentials to security." Malcolm looked to Darius in disbelief. "Sir, you can't be serious, based on her word against mine." "Based on documented evidence and multiple witness statements," Darius corrected him. "And it's not my decision. It's the recommendation of our EVP of Customer Experience, who happens to have 6 months of first-hand observations." As security escorted a protesting Malcolm from the room, attention turned to the adjacent conference room, where Eleanor Whitfield could be seen through the glass, now standing and pointing accusingly at someone off-screen. "She's demanding to speak with you," Darius told Jasmine. "Says she'll only discuss settlement terms with the actual decision-maker." Jasmine considered this. She still thinks this is something she can buy her way out of. "Is it?" Darius asked, genuinely curious about his daughter's approach. After a moment's thought, Jasmine stood. "Let's find out." As she entered the adjacent conference room, with her father Eleanor Whitfield's tirade cut off abruptly, the socialite took in Jasmine's transformed appearance, now in a tailored business suit rather than a flight attendant's uniform. Her braided hair, dried and neatly styled, her bearing confident and authoritative. Mrs. Whitfield. Jasmine greeted her professionally. "I understand you wanted to speak with me." Eleanor recovered quickly, adopting a conciliatory tone that didn't reach her eyes. "Miss Bailey, there's clearly been a misunderstanding today. I'd like to put this unfortunate incident behind us." "A misunderstanding," Jasmine repeated neutrally. "Is that how you characterize physical assault and racist comments?" "That's a gross exaggeration," Eleanor insisted. "I barely touched your uniform, which was clearly defective to tear so easily. And I never said anything remotely racial." Richard Whitfield winced visibly. "Eleanor, they have videos. Multiple passengers recorded the incident." "And does the video show me saying anything about race?" Eleanor challenged. "Being concerned about an employee wearing what appeared to be stolen luxury goods isn't racist, it's responsible. You stated that standards had slipped since they let them fly in the planes, then let them work on the planes." Jasmine quoted precisely. "The context made your meaning quite clear, Mrs. Whitfield." Eleanor's expression hardened. "You can't prove what I meant by that." "We don't have to," Darius interjected. "The company's anti-discrimination policy covers both explicit and implicit bias. But more importantly, you physically assaulted a crew member, which is a federal offense." "This is ridiculous," Eleanor exclaimed. "Richard, tell them who they're dealing with." Your company's entire contract is at stake. Richard shifted uncomfortably. Eleanor, please. Let me handle this. He turned to Darius and Jasmine with a practiced, executive smile. Surely we can come to some arrangement that satisfies all parties. We're prepared to offer a generous settlement to avoid any unpleasant publicity. Mr. Whitfield Jasmine replied evenly. Do you really believe your wife's behavior today is something money can or should erase? Richard hesitated, glancing at Eleanor before answering carefully. I believe in making amends when mistakes occur. And I believe that pragmatic solutions benefit everyone more than protracted conflicts, even when those pragmatic solutions enable continued discriminatory behavior. Jasmine pressed. Before Richard could answer, his phone rang. After checking the screen, his face tightened. Excuse me, I need to take this. He stepped away, speaking in hushed tones. Eleanor leaned forward, dropping her voice. Listen to me carefully. I sit on the board that oversees your diversity grant applications. My family's foundation contributes to the scholarship program your father is so proud of. Do you really want to jeopardize all that over a torn jacket? Are you threatening our charitable initiatives because you faced consequences for assaulting me? Jasmine asked, her voice level, but her eyes flashing with anger. I'm simply stating facts, Eleanor replied coldly. Actions have consequences, yours as well as mine. Richard returned, his expression grim. That was our legal team. Apparently videos of the incident are already circulating on social media. Skyline racism is trending. He showed Eleanor his phone screen where a clip clearly captured her pulling on Jasmine's uniform while making derogatory comments. Eleanor's composed facade finally cracked. This is a setup. You were undercover, deliberately trying to provoke passengers into inappropriate behavior. Mrs. Whitfield Jasmine said with remarkable restraint, I was doing my job. The only person responsible for your behavior today is you. As security personnel entered to escort the Whitfields out, Eleanor made one last, desperate attempt. You'll regret this. Do you know how many influential people I know? Your airline will suffer. Darius stepped forward. Mrs. Whitfield, let me be clear. Skyline Airways would rather lose every dollar of business associated with people who share your attitudes than compromise on the respect we owe our employees. That's not just a moral position. It's good business. As the Whitfields were led away, Jasmine caught Richard looking back with an expression that suggested he at least understood the magnitude of the situation. Whether that understanding would translate to meaningful change in his own behavior remained to be seen. Back in the main conference room, Jasmine's phone was lighting up with notifications as the incident went viral. Zoe showed her own screen, where the video clips were being shared thousands of times per minute. So much for keeping a low profile until the official announcement, Jasmine remarked wryly. Jasmine, her father said quietly. I know this isn't how you wanted your executive role to be revealed. If you'd preferred to delay the official announcement until this settles down. She shook her head firmly. No, this is exactly why I needed to experience the front lines firsthand. What happened today isn't an isolated incident. It's just one that happened to be caught on camera and happened to the boss's daughter. She gestured to Zoe and the other flight attendants. They face versions of this every day without the protection of my last name. Darius nodded, pride evident in his expression. Then, what do you propose? Jasmine looked around at the assembled team, her mind racing with ideas that had been forming throughout her undercover experience. First, we get ahead of the narrative. We issue a statement supporting our crew member. Not me specifically, but any crew member who experiences discrimination or assault. Second, we accelerate the policy changes I've been developing. And third, she paused, a determined smile forming. We use this as a catalyst for the industry-wide conversation that's long overdue. As the team began mobilizing to implement her directives, Jasmine felt a strange sense of gratitude toward Eleanor Whitfield. The woman's appalling behavior had accelerated changes that might otherwise have taken years to implement. Sometimes, Jasmine reflected the most effective catalyst for positive change was exposing the very worst of what needed changing. 3 hours after the incident, Jasmine sat across from her father in his private office at JFK. The expansive space, with its panoramic views of the runways, was designed to impress, but neither Bailey was focused on the vista at the moment. Between them lay printouts of social media metrics, preliminary legal assessments, and initial public relations analyses. The videos have been viewed over 2 million times, Jasmine said, scanning the latest report. We're trending nationally. Darius leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled thoughtfully. And the sentiment analysis. 87% in our favor, she replied. The remaining 13% is split between those defending Whitfield and those criticizing us for not having stronger protocols to prevent such incidents in the first place. That last part isn't wrong, Darius acknowledged. Your undercover work exposed gaps we need to address. A knock at the door preceded the entrance of Skyline's General Counsel Marion Chen and Communications Director Jackson Moore. We've prepared options for your review. Marion announced distributing tablets with detailed legal strategies, everything from a quiet settlement to full prosecution. Jackson followed with a PR perspective. The story's going viral faster than we can track. Major news outlets are requesting statements, and we've had calls from 3 morning shows wanting interviews. Darius looked to Jasmine. This is your call. You were the one directly affected. Jasmine took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment. 6 months ago, she had embarked on the undercover program to understand Skyline's operations from the ground up. She never anticipated that her experience would culminate in becoming the focal point of a national conversation about race, class, and dignity in the workplace. I need to speak with someone first, she decided. Can you bring Zoe Washington up here? 15 minutes later, Zoe entered the office, clearly still adjusting to her sudden entry into the executive realm. This place is nicer than my entire apartment, she quipped, taking in the luxurious surroundings before growing serious. How are you holding up, Jazz? I'm processing, Jasmine admitted. But I need your perspective before we make any decisions. You've been on the front lines longer than my 6 months. What would actually make a difference for the crew? Zoe considered the question thoughtfully. Honestly, consequences. Real ones, not just for passengers who cross the line, but for supervisors who don't support us. She glanced briefly at Darius before continuing. No offense, sir, but until today, crew members had no confidence that reports of discrimination would be taken seriously. No offense taken, Darius assured her. That's exactly why Jasmine's program was necessary. And what about Eleanor Whitfield specifically? Jasmine pressed. If you were me, what would you do about her? Zoe's expression turned contemplative. That's complicated. Part of me wants to see her face consequences serious enough to make headlines, to make people like her think twice. But another part wonders if that just turns her into a martyr for people who share her views. Jasmine nodded, having wrestled with the same dilemma. What would serve the greater good, more public accountability, or systematic change? Why choose Zoe challenged? Use her actions as the catalyst for the bigger changes, but don't let her off the hook either. A smile spread across Jasmine's face as pieces of a strategy began aligning in her mind. She turned to her father and the waiting executives. Here's what we're gonna do, she began confidently. First, I'm pressing charges, not as Jasmine Bailey, Executive Vice President, but as a flight attendant assaulted in the performance of her duties. Every crew member deserves that protection. She turned to Jackson. PR-wise, we're getting ahead of this. Issue a statement confirming the incident, expressing zero tolerance for discriminatory behavior, and announcing accelerated implementation of new anti-discrimination policies. What new policies? Jackson asked, fingers poised over his tablet. The ones I've been developing during my undercover work, Jasmine explained, pulling up a comprehensive document on her tablet. Mandatory response protocols for supervisors, clear escalation procedures, protection from retaliation, and a passenger code of conduct with actual enforcement mechanisms. Marion reviewed the document with raised eyebrows. This is impressively thorough. How long have you been working on this? Since my third week undercover, Jasmine admitted. After I witnessed a Filipino flight attendant being berated with racial slurs while her supervisor looked the other way. Darius's expression darkened. Was that incident documented? Every detail Jasmine confirmed, along with 46 others. Malcolm Reynolds wasn't an anomaly. He was a symptom of a culture we've allowed to develop. The room fell silent as the executives absorbed the implications. It was Zoe who finally spoke. So, what happens to Malcolm? That depends on the results of the full investigation, Jasmine replied. But at minimum, he'll need to complete comprehensive anti-bias training before being considered for any supervisory role again. And the Whitfields, Marion prompted. Eleanor's already reached out through her attorney, offering a substantial settlement if we'll sign an NDA. Jasmine shook her head firmly. No NDA. What happened needs to be addressed openly. As for Richard Whitfield's company, she turned to her father. That's a board-level decision about the contract, but I recommend transparency there too. We should explain precisely why we're not moving forward with the partnership. Agreed, Darius nodded. We'll convene an emergency board meeting tomorrow. As the meeting continued, they were interrupted by Jackson's assistant with urgent news. Sir Mrs. Whitfield has just made a public statement claiming she was set up by Skyline as part of a publicity stunt. It's running on several news outlets. Jasmine exchanged a glance with her father. That was faster than expected. And more desperate, Darius added. She's making it worse for herself. Actually, Jasmine mused, this might work in our favor. Jackson, I want to schedule a press conference, but not to directly counter her claims. We're announcing the Skyline Respect Initiative, a comprehensive program addressing discrimination in air travel. Jackson looked skeptical. You want to respond to a PR crisis with a policy announcement? I want to transform a PR crisis into a defining moment for our company, Jasmine corrected. Eleanor Whitfield's actions were reprehensible, but they're also symptomatic of a broader issue. We can address both simultaneously. As they refined the strategy, Jasmine's phone buzzed with an unexpected notification. That's interesting, she murmured, reading the message. What is it? Her father asked. An email from Richard Whitfield sent to my personal address rather than through legal channels. She scanned the contents quickly. He's requesting a private meeting without lawyers or PR teams. Says he wants to make things right, regardless of what Eleanor does. Darius frowned. Could be a trap, or damage control for his business interests. Or, Jasmine suggested he might actually be experiencing a moral awakening. Either way, I think it's worth hearing him out, with appropriate precautions. The meeting continued late into the evening, planning the company's response on multiple fronts. Throughout the discussions, Jasmine found herself reflecting on the strange twist of fate that had accelerated her plans. Had Eleanor Whitfield not torn her uniform today, the undercover program would have continued for 3 more weeks, and the policy changes might have taken months to implement. As the team finally prepared to depart, Zoe pulled Jasmine aside. For what it's worth, you were the most genuine flight attendant I've ever worked with, even knowing who you really were. Jasmine smiled gratefully. That means more than you know. And you're the first person I want on my executive team when the dust settles. Me. In management, Zoe laughed incredulously. I don't even own a proper suit. That can be arranged, Jasmine assured her. We need voices like yours. At the decision-making level. That's another lesson from today. As they parted ways, Jasmine felt a renewed sense of purpose. What had begun as a traumatic experience was transforming into an opportunity for meaningful change, not just within Skyline Airways, but potentially across an entire industry. Eleanor Whitfield had intended to put Jasmine in her place, never imagining that place would be at the forefront of a movement. Back in her father's office, Jasmine found Darius standing at the window, gazing out at the planes taking off and landing in the gathering dusk. "You know, when you first proposed this undercover program, I thought you were being overly cautious," he admitted. "I didn't fully understand why you felt you needed to experience every position firsthand." And now she prompted. He turned to face her eyes, reflecting both regret and pride. "Now I see that I've been insulated from realities I should have been more aware of. The airline I built has gaps I never recognized or perhaps didn't want to see." Jasmine joined him at the window. "That's why succession planning needs more than just sharing knowledge. It needs fresh perspectives." "Well, you've certainly got that," Darius acknowledged with a small smile. "So, EVP Bailey, are you ready for your first official crisis management test?" Jasmine squared her shoulders, her expression resolute. "I've been ready." Eleanor Whitfield just moved up the timeline. As father and daughter looked out at the Skyline Airways planes bearing their family name, both understood that tomorrow would mark not just a corporate announcement, but the beginning of a new chapter for the company, one that would either define or diminish their legacy. 1 month later, the grand ballroom of the Skyline Airways corporate headquarters buzzed with anticipation. Television cameras lined the back wall, journalists filled the seats, and industry executives mingled nervously, all awaiting the press conference that had been cryptically described as a watershed moment for the airline industry. Behind the stage, Jasmine Bailey adjusted her tailored Navy suit, the same shade as the flight attendant uniform she'd worn a month earlier, a deliberate choice for today's announcement. The past 4 weeks had been a whirlwind of legal proceedings, policy revisions, emergency board meetings, and intense media scrutiny. Nervous Darius asked joining her in the preparation room. Focused, she corrected with a small smile. This is what all the preparation was for. The door opened as Zoe Washington entered looking professionally polished in her new role as Director of Crew Advocacy, a position Jasmine had created specifically for her. "Standing room only out there," Zoe reported. "And you'll never guess who just slipped in the back." "Richard Whitfield." Jasmine raised an eyebrow. "Alone." "Very much so," Zoe confirmed. "Word is, Eleanor is still in the Hamptons, recovering from the trauma of public persecution." She made air quotes around the phrase Eleanor's publicist had used repeatedly in recent weeks. The private meeting with Richard 2 weeks earlier had proven surprisingly productive. Separated from his wife's influence, he had shown genuine remorse, not just for the business consequences, but for his role as a silent enabler of behavior he'd long recognized as problematic. 3 minutes, Miss Bailey, a staff member, announced, handing her the final version of the speech. Jasmine took a deep breath, centering herself. When she walked onto that stage, it would be her first official public appearance as Executive Vice President and heir apparent to Skyline Airways. The circumstances were not what she had planned, but perhaps they were exactly what was needed. "Let's change an industry," she told her father, who nodded with pride as they moved toward the stage. The lights seemed blindingly bright as Jasmine took her position at the podium, cameras clicking rapidly. She gazed out at the assembled crowd, noting familiar faces. Board members, executives from competing airlines, advocacy groups, and, in the back, Richard Whitfield looking somber and attentive. "Good morning," she began, her voice clear and confident. "1 month ago, a disturbing incident aboard one of our flights sparked a necessary conversation about dignity, respect, and accountability in air travel. Today, I'm here not just to continue that conversation, but to transform it into action." She paused, letting her gaze sweep across the room. "For the past 6 months, I worked undercover as a flight attendant for Skyline Airways, an experience that was intended to prepare me for my executive role by understanding our operations from the ground up. What I discovered was both inspiring and troubling. I witnessed incredible professionalism and compassion from our crew members, often in the face of behavior that no one should have to tolerate in their workplace. Murmurs rippled through the audience as she continued. The incident that many of you have seen captured on video was not an isolated event. It was merely the most visible example of a pattern that exists throughout our industry. One where customer service is too often confused with subservience, where discriminatory behavior is excused as passenger frustration, and where those on the front lines lack adequate support from management. Jasmine unveiled the first slide of her presentation, displaying the Skyline Respect Initiative logo. Today, Skyline Airways is announcing the most comprehensive anti-discrimination program in aviation history. This isn't just a policy change. It's a fundamental shift in how we define the relationship between airlines, employees, and passengers. Over the next 30 minutes, she detailed the multifaceted initiative, enhanced training for all staff, clear escalation protocols, with accountability at every level, a passenger code of conduct that would be enforced without regard to fare class or frequent flyer status, and perhaps most controversially, a new industry-wide database tracking passengers who had engaged in discriminatory or abusive behavior. This last element requires cooperation across airlines, Jasmine acknowledged. I'm pleased to announce that as of this morning, 7 major carriers have already agreed to participate, with discussions ongoing with 12 others. She continued with the announcement of a new scholarship program for underprivileged youth interested in aviation careers, funded by a foundation established with Jasmine's own resources. But perhaps the most important change is one of culture, she emphasized. Starting today, every passenger in premium cabins will receive, along with their welcome amenities, a brief reminder of our expectations regarding respectful treatment of crew members. Those unwilling to abide by these basic standards of human dignity are welcome to fly with our competitors, though I expect those options may become limited as more airlines adopt similar policies. A ripple of surprised laughter moved through the audience at her candor. As for internal accountability, Jasmine continued, her expression growing more serious. We've completed a thorough review of supervisory practices throughout Skyline. I'm sorry to report that the behaviors exhibited by Malcolm Reynolds were not anomalous. Effective immediately, 17 supervisors have been reassigned to non-management roles pending completion of comprehensive anti-bias training, and 3 executives have chosen early retirement. She paused as cameras flashed rapidly, capturing what would become the headline image for most news outlets. Malcolm Reynolds himself has made a different choice. After completing initial sensitivity training, he requested assignment to our new Diversity and Inclusion Department, where he will work directly with crew members from backgrounds different from his own. His journey of accountability will be ongoing and closely monitored. Jasmine turned to a new slide showing statistics from her undercover work. These numbers tell a disturbing story about disparities in how incidents are handled based on the race and gender of both passengers and crew members. This ends today at Skyline, and we challenge our competitors to conduct similar internal audits. As she approached the conclusion of her remarks, Jasmine's tone softened slightly. Some have asked about Eleanor Whitfield, whose actions catalyzed this moment of reckoning. The legal proceedings regarding her assault on a crew member are ongoing and will follow their due course. However, I can confirm that Mrs. Whitfield has been removed from the boards of 3 companies following independent investigations that revealed a pattern of similar behavior. She didn't mention that Richard Whitfield had been the one to initiate 2 of those investigations after their private meeting, his first steps toward making amends not just with Skyline, but within his own sphere of influence. More significantly, Jasmine continued, Mrs. Whitfield's actions have led to an unexpected positive outcome. The incident has prompted industry-wide soul-searching and concrete change that will benefit millions of travelers and hundreds of thousands of airline employees. She looked directly into the cameras for her closing remarks. At Skyline Airways, we believe that treating people with dignity isn't just the right thing to do, it's good business. We believe that accountability shouldn't depend on whether an incident is caught on camera or happens to someone with connections. And we believe that the time for mere talk about these issues is long past. Today we act. Thank you. The room erupted in applause as Darius joined her on stage, officially introducing her as Executive Vice President and announcing an accelerated timeline for her eventual transition to CEO. Jasmine has demonstrated not just the business acumen required to lead Skyline Airways, but the moral courage essential for transforming our industry, he stated proudly. Over the coming year, she will assume increasing operational control as I transition to chairman of the board. The press conference concluded with a Q&A session, during which Jasmine fielded difficult questions with the same poise she had shown during the confrontation a month earlier. When asked if she had spoken directly with Eleanor Whitfield since the incident, she replied with characteristic diplomacy. Mrs. Whitfield and I have not spoken directly, though our legal representatives remain in communication. I believe in focusing on systemic solutions rather than individual grievances. As the crowd dispersed, Richard Whitfield approached the stage, waiting respectfully until the last reporters had finished their questions. Miss Bailey, he began, his voice containing none of the entitlement that had characterized his wife's tone. I wanted to thank you personally for handling this situation with such dignity. Jasmine regarded him thoughtfully. Mr. Whitfield, your actions since our meeting have spoken louder than any words could. The anti-discrimination initiatives you've implemented in your own company are impressive. He nodded, a mix of regret and determination in his expression. I've spent too many years enabling behavior I knew was wrong. It took seeing it through your eyes to find the courage to make changes. And personally, Jasmine asked carefully, how are things proceeding? The divorce papers were filed last week, Richard replied quietly. Some relationships can't and shouldn't be salvaged. Before Jasmine could respond, a young woman approached hesitantly, her resemblance to Eleanor unmistakable, despite her very different demeanor. Miss Bailey, I'm Caroline Whitfield, Eleanor's daughter. The young woman's voice wavered slightly. I wanted to apologize personally for my mother's behavior. I've been watching how you've handled this situation, and she paused, gathering courage. I was wondering if Skyline's new mentorship program for women in aviation is still accepting applications. Jasmine's surprise quickly gave way to a warm smile. We're always looking for passionate candidates, Miss Whitfield. Change often begins with the next generation, finding a different path. As Richard watched the interaction between his daughter and Jasmine with visible emotion, Darius rejoined the group. Mr. Whitfield, he acknowledged with professional courtesy. I understand congratulations are in order. The sustainability initiatives your company announced last week are exactly the kind of innovation the industry needs. Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Coming from you, that means a great deal. Richard glanced at his daughter, now deep in conversation with Jasmine about career possibilities. Sometimes the most valuable partnerships arise from unexpected circumstances. Indeed, Darius agreed, following his gaze. And the most meaningful change often begins with a single moment of truth. 1 month after a torn uniform had exposed ugly realities, those realities were being transformed. Eleanor Whitfield had intended to put Jasmine in her place, never imagining that place would be at the forefront of industry-wide reform. A moment meant to diminish had instead empowered not just Jasmine Bailey, but potentially thousands of others who would benefit from the changes now in motion. As Jasmine watched Caroline Whitfield exchanging contact information with Zoe for the mentorship program, she reflected on how a single incident could catalyze transformation across generations. Eleanor's actions had backfired spectacularly, creating opportunities for her own daughter to break the cycle of entitlement and prejudice that Jasmine thought was perhaps the most satisfying resolution of all. This story illuminates powerful truths about confronting discrimination in today's world. First, documentation is crucial. Without the passengers' videos and Jasmine's meticulous notes, Eleanor's behavior might have been dismissed. Second, strategic patience often trumps immediate reaction. Replied by following the Bailey method of staying calm, documenting everything, and responding strategically, Jasmine transformed a personal attack into systemic change. Most importantly, the story demonstrates how privilege operates as both shield and blindness. Eleanor's entitlement prevented her from seeing Jasmine as a full human being deserving of dignity, while Richard's silent complicity made him equally culpable until he chose a different path. True leadership isn't about avoiding difficult confrontations, but using them as catalysts for necessary change. Jasmine's undercover experience gave her authentic understanding that executive distance never could, allowing her to implement meaningful reforms rather than superficial policies. Finally, the story reminds us that discrimination doesn't just harm individuals. It poisons entire systems, wastes talent, and ultimately damages everyone. Only by confronting it directly, holding people accountable, and creating structural changes can we build workplaces and communities where everyone's dignity remains intact. What moment in this story resonated with you most? Have you ever witnessed or experienced discrimination that went unchallenged? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you believe in standing up against racism and discrimination, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories of justice and transformation. Share with someone who needs inspiration today. Thank you for watching, and remember, one person with courage and strategic thinking can create ripples of change that transform entire industries.